Next, the historic La Mesa train depot is a small structure, but it holds more than 100 years of railroad history. The depot was almost lost, but thanks to the work of volunteers, they have fully restored it, and it looks magnificent. The La Mesa train depot is one of the oldest structures in San Diego. It was built in 1884. It is small, like many train depots were during that era. While many across the country have been lost, the La Mesa train depot was saved, thanks in part to this man, retired architect Larry Rose, and others who are passionate about preserving railroad history in San Diego.
It's a very traditional little wooden depot that was probably the most common shape and certainly the most common gingerbread trim, board and bat, and the little corbels all over it, of every depot in the United States. There were literally thousands of depots like this.
But in 1915, the depot was moved to the opposite side of the tracks because the streets in La Mesa were being paved for the very first time. Some of the depot's features and route names would change through the years.
Going through here in the 1890s was the San Diego and Cuyamaca. Later on, after several shuffles and new owners and whatnot, it became the San Diego and Cuyamaca and Eastern. And that's what it was when the Spreckels interests bought the railroad in 1912. And it was the last one. They had been gobbling up all the other little railroads, the National City and Otay and all the rest of them, so that they finally all ended up under one ownership under the Spreckels interests as the San Diego and Arizona.
Thousands who drive by every day see a small wooden building and a historic locomotive from the era on the tracks outside. But the building itself was almost lost about 60 years ago.
We lost this one in 1951, 52, right in there when it was moved to Lakeside. The Lakeside Chamber of Commerce thought they were going to build a little western village. A fire came through, burnt every one of those buildings down except this depot. Scorched this depot pretty bad, especially on the baggage room end. And burnt some of the core bills, but it stayed intact. They got it put out and saved the building.
While it was saved, the building later fell into ruins and turned into a chicken coop. After it was cleaned out, the building was moved back to its original location in La Mesa along Spring Street.
But we sat it down on this, leveled it all up, slowly jacked it back down in its foundation, and then the hard part started. We had to replace all the rotted out wood from the worm farm and chicken coop days, and replace as much of it as we could, as we had to. The ceiling is all original, so we were able to save a lot of stuff that didn't get damaged in either the fire or the chicken coop. So most of it that we could possibly save has been saved.
Larry and the others from the Pacific Southwest Railway Museum Association are adamant about preserving the past. They volunteer countless hours restoring the depot. It looks just like something from 1884.
Well, this is called the Agent's Bay. Every railroad depot in America had a little nook just like this that usually projected out into the track side of the depot so you could look out the windows and see the train coming.
The Agent's Bay is where the train orders were written for the conductors as the train went by. This stick would help deliver the orders from the platform without stopping the train. Years later, a telephone would be added to the Agent's Bay. Much of the original information to restore the depot came by accident.
I was one of the project architects for the Jim Mills building, and to clear the site to get ready for the project, they emptied out the upstairs of the old San Diego and Arizona freight office there. Upstairs in that building was the paper railroad history of everything that ever happened in San Diego in the way of railroading. All of it got collected by the Spreckels railroad interests.
Larry couldn't believe what he was seeing. More than 100 years of railroad history headed to the landfill, including this 1885 railroad map. So this is one of the things that you found, Larry?
I found this thing in the dumpster. I actually caught this on the fly as it was thrown out of a second-story window in the old freight office downtown.
And what is this?
This is probably the very first railroad survey ever done in San Diego County. The date here is 1855.
It would have all been lost had Larry not saved it. He fondly refers to the findings as the dumpster collection. That collection would have a detailed inventory about every train depot in the region. The The railroad history Larry saved is now being stored in 2 large storage containers in Campo. The association is desperately looking for a site for a museum that will hold more than 100 years of railroad history.
Everything in it right now is exactly the way the contents inventory showed it. The contents inventory had a floor plan in it, okay, and that was about 1915. So we started putting everything back toward the floor plan showed it, including the desk and the cage and the wire ticket office and all of it.
Restoring the La Mesa train depot is a passion for Larry and the other volunteers. No detail was spared. Many of the antiques were at other Southern Pacific train depots. They look like they've been part of the La Mesa train depot since the start. The La Mesa train depot is a jewel right in the middle of town. It's something everyone should enjoy. Some say the historic Campo depot never reached its full potential. It still played a vital role in railroad history. But the Campo station is the only train depot in the world operated solely by volunteers, and that's according to the Smithsonian Museum. What a credit to their work. Trains are fascinating. That's why walking through this locomotive at the historic Campo train depot is such a treat. Dick Pennick is a volunteer locomotive engineer with the Pacific Southwest Railway Museum Association. He runs the cars through more than 100 miles of track in the far East County and in Mexico. The trains are still in operation for passengers to enjoy. The depot was built just as World War I was raging on in Europe. It was in operation until the 1950s.
The building behind me was actually built in 1917, but it was not the first depot here. The tracks reached Campo in the fall of 1916, and once trains began to run soon thereafter, they had to have an agency here with an agent to deal with the arrival and departure of trains.
The Campo line was known as the San Diego, Arizona Railway. From the start, the railway would offer regular service to passengers and freight. At the time, it was the end of the railroad from San Diego. It would later be extended to the Imperial Valley. Because of the services, a train office was built.
He borrowed an old boxcar that wasn't currently being used. They hauled it out here on its own wheels and parked it right around here on the track side, down where the freight platform is, and they cut a hole in one end of it and put a door in, and they actually set up an agency in that for a few months while this building was being built.
This is where all the maintenance is done, and where we park, some of the locomotives are parked here at night, especially if it looks like it's going to rain.
Retired architect Larry Rose is another of those volunteers with the association. Walking through the yard, you can see dozens of historic rail cars, locomotives, and cabooses, some from the 1880s.
This one's been restored and operated up here. It was built in 1912 with the Baldwin outfit in Pennsylvania, and we've operated it on trains here until the flue time ran out on it. You can only get 5 years out of a full-blown flue change and inspection, then you got to tear the whole thing down and rebuild it again. Every time you do that, there's hundreds of thousands of hours of people doing it.
The work of restoring historic trains is tedious and costly. It takes up to 10 years and $500,000 to restore one, and locomotives can only be in operation for 5 years. There are some real rare cars in the yard, some like this one, which were used as a movie prop in Hollywood.
The interesting part about this, what this car is really all about, is this little section right here. Okay, this car is from Arkansas, from the 1880s. This is the colored section. This was a segregated coach, okay, called a Jim Crow car. And here's that section still there after all these years.
At one point, the train depot was turned into living quarters for one of the agents in the 60s and 70s. Years later, volunteers cleaned it out and restored the depot to its original form. An 1880s boxcar once parked in front of the depot was put back on the tracks, a major undertaking.
So that's probably the oldest boxcar in Southern California. The Trolley Museum up at Paris has one just about as old that they've found too. So that's certainly the oldest one in San Diego County. And from the 1890s, and it's always been here. We have the original paperwork.
As we know, the railroads were once the main source of transportation for the entire country, but times have changed, and many of the historic train depots have been lost, not only in San Diego County, but across the nation.
Gradually over time, there was no need for these small country agency stations, and most of them, when they were discontinued from use, were torn down. A few were saved. This one was saved. A few north of San Diego were saved, and there are historic depot buildings around, but they're very few.
That's why volunteers like Dick and Larry and the others hope to continue in their quest of preserving railroad history for future generations. You can enjoy the historic Campo train depot. It is now a museum, and there are ride excursions. What an opportunity to relive history.